So this Thanksgiving, me and Melody just wanted to take a minute here and share a little bit of our hearts of what's going on in our lives with adoption and with a little boy named Isaiah Lewis, who God has brought to us, brought in our lives. And we wanted to take a moment and just say how thankful we are for God's heart for adoption and for Isaiah, and to share our story, our adoption story with you. At work here at the Great Southwest Prayer Center, I was spending time with the Lord one day when this team came in to do their intercessory worship and prayer set for a 2-hour set. And during their set, it was focused on adoption. A part of their set, they were praying and worshiping unto the Lord about. Their focus was adoption. And that day, I don't even know how to describe in words what happened. All I know is that my heart was so filled with the love of God as a father, for the fatherless, for orphans, and for adoption. And He began to speak to me that day about adoption. And it just changed my life in a moment. I just began to weep in the presence of God in the prayer center. And I began to cry out to God, asking Him to speak the same thing to Melody, that I said, Lord, I don't want to say anything to her. I want You to reveal the same thing to her, that if it's Your will for us to adopt, now I say yes, and I just ask You to reveal the same thing to Melody.
I was out running one morning and just running on the usual path that I run on, and there was a lady on a bicycle, and there was an empty bicycle seat on the back for like an infant carrier, and I just saw that, and I just like, someone's missing. And like, that was when the Lord just really put it in my heart that there was a child for us to adopt. And that was the first time that I really felt it in my heart that this was what God was leading us to. So even going through miscarriage and the pain of going through that actually propelled us into seeking God and asking Him what was His plans for our future, what was His plans for our family. And just around the same time was when I went for that run that one morning and saw that bicycle and the lady with the baby carrier on the back, and I just knew something in my heart was telling me personally that this was the path that God had chosen for us to take.
Yeah, so I was at work, I believe, that day, and Melody calls me, and she says, she was just crying, and she says, God's speaking to me about adoption. And I said, me too. I said, now we need to talk. So that night we got home and we started talking together. We cried together, and we sought the Lord together, and we began to pray and say, okay, we say yes. We say, God, this is Your will for us. We say yes to this. And we began to pray, and specifically asking God to send us the children that He has for us to raise. We're specifically asking Him to bring them to us, there's so many children in the world, so many orphans in the world. Where do you even start? Where do you begin? And we began to ask Him for the specific children. And in that same time, we started doing a bunch of research for adoption agencies. We discovered an agency called Alternatives in Motion, AIM, and we did some research and felt like God was saying apply through them. So we did. We applied through AIM, and about that same time, a friend of a friend said that there was a friend of ours, a mutual friend, who had adopted a year ago, and I didn't know they had adopted. So we made an appointment to talk to them over the phone, and then they invited us over to their house to come and talk about their adoption story.
So we showed up there on one Sunday afternoon, and as soon as they opened the door, this little 2-year-old little guy, Isaiah, just saw Samuel, and he just took off, and he just raised his arms up and went to Samuel, and like he had known him his whole life, like he just knew him. And our friends and myself, we were completely blown away. We found out that they had just gotten Isaiah 2 days before we met with them. And we also found out that they had gone through the same adoption agency with their adoption, and that's who Isaiah was placed in their care with.
Right.
The same adoption agency.
We had no idea that was the agency they had already adopted through a year before with their little girl. And that same agency had contacted them 2 days before we got there to come pick him up. Could they foster him? So they picked him up and brought him home, and 2 days later we come to the door and Isaiah's there with them. We've been visiting him once a week, every weekend, or try to every week. Go and visit him and spend time with him over at the foster family's house. And the relationship has just deepened and connected even more with him. And we can see God's hand of grace within his heart, within Isaiah's heart, and with our hearts, bringing us into being a family. And we believe with all of our hearts, and we know with all of our hearts that God has chosen us to parent Isaiah Lewis and to raise him. And we are just thrilled and so thankful for God's grace and for God's will as we start our family through adoption. So if you would like to adopt with us, to be a part of Isaiah Lewis's adoption, the way to do that would be to go to our website through Adopt Together, which is www.adopttogether.org/stonefamily, where you can read about our adoption story, but also you can give on that website if you'd like to give towards Isaiah's adoption. Thank you for partnering with us and helping us together to give Isaiah Lewis the gift of a family, of a loving home. Together, we can see God's will fulfilled in giving him a loving home.